Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you to Ron Reed and EDU for scheduling this session. Let me introduce and bring up our panel first. And I know a lot of you are here to see her. Amazing actress, activist, head of chairman of Voto Latino that has signed up to over 200,000 voters, and an entrepreneur, Rosario Dawson. Next is the co-chairman of our Aspen Institute Task Force on Learning and the Internet. He leads Digital Learning Now. He's been an executive at the White House, at the Department of Education, at the Gates Foundation, Pennsylvania Department of Education. He's led all those organizations. John Bailey. And our third panelist is a member of this task force. He's a known blogger, also an entrepreneur, a columnist, was a columnist for Wired Magazine, as an advisor to many startups, and well known, I think, to all of you for Dashes.com, Anil Dash. So this panel is to talk about preview our Aspen Institute Task Force on Learning and the Internet. And this is a task force that came into existence because of a number of opportunities and some barriers. So let's start with what the opportunity is. Obviously, you all know that technology has great potential to enhance and accelerate lifelong learning. And by the way, this is about learning, not necessarily education. It's really about the learning process from throughout our lives. Now, we have a movie star here, but we have our own movie star for the task force. And actually, the great group called Swell Creative has put together a little movie that describes this potential. So Wanda Cook Robinson is the superintendent of the Southfield, Michigan School District, and we went and filmed what's going on there for let's just run part of this film. It's about a 4-minute film. We won't run the whole 4 minutes, but just give you an idea of how we are seeing the opportunity.
I love her.
I think what the internet and the digital tools have done is to provide no boundaries. In the past, there were boundaries to learning. There were boundaries to how much students could access, which meant there was a cap on what children could learn and how high they can achieve. You know how to do this? I think that this social digital media environment is going to bring education at a level, a very high quality level, to students who have very low access.
Amigo, no te invitó a la fiesta.
The Aspen Task Force on Learning and the Internet is a group of individuals from a variety of fields. And the mission of the task force is for all of us to come together to look at this issue about the internet and learning. How do we help students have access to the internet anywhere, anytime, in a secure environment? Is there a difference between young learners and older learners in terms of the information flow or what they should have access to? How are educators at all levels looking at their role and what should it be? What about all the data that we're generating? How are we managing that data? How are we keeping that data safe? When you start thinking about children and safety and internet and learning and all of the things that go with that, it is so multifaceted. And what we have to do as educators is to be able to identify a framework for what that looks like and the impact that it's going to have on children.
So that's, I think, a great introduction for what our task force is about. But we found as we went along that there were a number of barriers that we found as we went along that mission to see how we can foster lifelong learning using technology as a tool. And as Wanda just mentioned, trust that online locations are safe and can respect privacy and personal data was the first one. Second, and very important, is access for all. And throughout our research, we've found this is an overriding consideration. We've got these tools. Is it going to accelerate or exacerbate the digital divide or not? The third is, do we have the tools to take advantage of this? And this gets to the question of literacy once you get access. And fourth is, what is the infrastructure that fosters this? Whether it be interoperability or credentialing, or how do we foster this through not only the hardware, but also some of the protocols and software. So with that said, the MacArthur Foundation was kind enough to ask the Aspen Institute to organize this. We have started about over a year ago and have 20 incredible people. First of all, we have two great honorary co-chairs, one here, Rosario Dawson, the other Jeb Bush, former governor, obviously, of Florida. And his Foundation for Excellence in Education also has a campaign, Digital Learning Now, that John Bailey runs. And so John essentially is connected in that way to the governor. And the chairman or the president of Voto Latino that Rosario chairs is our other co-chair. So John and Maria Teresa Kumar are the co-chairs. Maria Teresa just had a fabulous, her second baby and couldn't come down and join us, but sends her best wishes here. But the group includes a wide variety of educators, technologists, researchers, entrepreneurs, companies. So they include representatives from, for example, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Comcast, Mozilla, Creative Commons, former FCC Chairman Julius Janikowski, former Commissioner Deborah Taylor Tate, Ann Collier, basically a security and privacy advocate, a number of just really outstanding, Alice Marwick, a researcher, John Seeley Brown, great thinker in learning and education. So what's great about being a part of the Aspen Institute, which I've been fortunate enough to do for a number of years, is that we are able to gather people from a variety of task force, a variety of interests, from the business sector, from the nonprofit sector, from government, and take a nonpartisan, we're assiduously nonpartisan approach, we're a nonprofit, to look at a particular issue that's on the cutting edge of society. This process took, as I said, over a year. We've had 4 meetings in places around the country. We have done outreach. We've had this great group, Penn Hill Group, that has gone and helped us interview over 60 people. We've gone through over 90 reports. We've had a public engagement process that Swell Creative has helped us with that has a social media aspect. We are at aspentaskforce.org. We're also at Twitter, hashtag Aspen Task Force. We urge you to join us in one form or another. With all that said, we are now at the point where we're coming close to issuing a report. We think we'll issue it in May. We wanted to preview that here and are delighted that we have the right people to do that. But before we do actually go into the actual where we're headed, I thought it would be good to get Rosario to say, why is this so important and what's brought her to this issue?
Hi, thank you. You know, it's interesting looking at the landscape of learning today and how different it was since I was a young girl. I remember us having access to computers in this, what turned out to be a charter school for middle school, and what a huge difference that did between what my learning experience was and the other students and peers my age. And going now and speaking in colleges and seeing everyone having a laptop open or an iPad with them, it just really transforms the entire expectation of the student and the access that they expect. And so I think it's really important that we address it and we talk about it, because I think, you know, the proliferation of technology in our lives, how it's literally this dimension that we exist upon, has not been spoken about, especially in education, and to the depth that I think it needs to be. And we're losing a lot of opportunities. And a lot of the things that have come up in trying to protect our young people, protect data, protect privacy, as we're seeing that we've given so much of it away, is also sometimes impeding our access to important resources that we need. So I was really excited to be a part of the Aspen Task Force Institute for Learning on the internet, specifically because I love joking and saying, you know, if you were to try to confuse a young person today, you'd put a rotary phone in front of them and you know, and try to make a joke about like, oh, didn't you used to hate having to dial people's numbers that had a lot of zeros in it? And they just look at you like, Siri, call home. You know, it's literally such a huge chasm between a lot of the educators that are teaching kids, especially if they're older, and the kids themselves and the expectations. So I think it's really amazing that we've been able to bring together so many different minds to the table to talk about this issue. People with a lot of conflicting interests, as a matter of fact, who are coming together and going, this is really important, and how do we resolve this problem so that we can start competing globally in a meaningful way. When you have less than 30% of schools across the nation that have broadband access that allows them to stream video and use the current tools that we already have for learning, that's a big problem. You know, we're already lagging behind education-wise, and that hurts our citizenry, that hurts our competition in the future. And so I'm really excited to be a part of the conversation that hopefully will really pinpoint things that will help us to figure out where we need to put our attention and our resources in the next following years.
Great. So, John, it's been a pleasure to be a part of this effort that you've led, and you've really shepherded this whole project. Give us an idea of where we're headed.
Sure. I think you know, I mean, what's been nice about this is I think Rosario just mentioned is the conflicting interests, that you have sort of a lot of different diverse opinions, you know, from FCC sort of government officials, you have industry representation. We had Wanda, which kept us honest much of the time in terms of what does this really mean for educators and for kids. And really sort of wrestling with you know, something that Governor Bush sort of really feels passionate about, which is how do you help every single child reach his or her full potential? And do we have an education system that helps them reach their full potential? And increasingly, his belief and our belief, and I think the task force's belief, is that it is this combination of digital learning with new resources, new education experiences, connected with broadband, that's creating new models of education that are really helping you reach kids in new and exciting ways. And you're going to see us talk a little bit in the report about these sort of new tensions put on our education system. From when school was sort of the primary way that kids learned, that was, you know, their learning materials were limited to what was in a school, the teachers in the school, the resources in the school. And increasingly, there's all these new learning opportunities, both physical, after-school activities, 4-H clubs, arts activities, museums, but then you also have a lot of virtual activities as well. So everything, think about the announcement yesterday with David Coleman and the College Board in Sal Khan. Now everyone has access to an SAT tutor. There's just unbelievable, you couldn't think about that in terms of 10 years ago, and now that's sort of part of this new learning network for students. The challenge for us is how to make sure that students have that access to those opportunities, and that's more than just broadband. Broadband is a very important component to that, but it's a lot of the policies we put in place that not just filters out some of the bad things, but filters out a lot of the good opportunities for kids. It's thinking about these issues of trust. I know a lot of you in sessions here at the conference have been wrestling with data privacy and online safety and security, but you sort of take a step back and think about it's all sort of wrapped up in trust. How do we create a trusted environment for kids, for educators, and for parents to engage in these learning opportunities? And so that's a huge opportunity as well. And then also thinking about broadband and also some of the digital literacy skills and other literacies that students need to navigate these waters in a responsible way, but in an empowered way. So they're not fearful, but they're empowered to actually take advantage of some of these opportunities.
Great. So, Anil, you've been a loyal member of this task force for attending all the meetings and all. What surprised you about where we've gone?
There were a lot of surprises. You know, I'm not somebody that comes from an education background. I didn't have any real knowledge about the issues except as a parent and how I think a lot of us confront these things. But I knew technology pretty well and I knew policy pretty well. And what was amazing was, I think to John's point, immediately the perspective of someone who runs a library in Cleveland, someone like Wanda who is a district superintendent, alongside someone who is in charge of privacy policy at Microsoft or data collection policy at Facebook. These are people that had never been in the room together. And obviously you wish you could have everybody in the world in the conversation, but even just that juxtaposition led to some incredible surprises. In the very first meeting of the task force, one of the conversations, just offhandedly, somebody had the data, that there were 700 laws on classroom technology passed at the state or local level in the United States last year. I think it would have been 2012. And we thought, so how many people are in this room? How many people are going to watch this session online? Maybe, it might not even be 700. And if you think about 700 laws, it's like, are there 700 experts on the application of technology in the classroom that we would trust to testify in front of a government to make policy? There might not even be enough people to intelligently weigh in on the amount of policy being created. So we can't rely on our current procedures for saying this is the right decision to make about policy unless we work together. The only thing that's going to get good policy made and good decisions made is sharing what we learned. And I think that was the biggest takeaway, the biggest surprise from the entire task force process and the report that's forthcoming is now there's ways to think about this, frameworks for trust, frameworks for even simple things like if technology is going to come into the classroom, most of the time the people advocating for it have been either educators or people trying to sell technology. Well, what about, as one small example, technologies that don't have a vendor or a salesperson attached to them? Who advocates for that? If you're using something open source or off the shelf, do school districts, do communities, do parents have a way to advocate for something that's going to come that's unexpected? Now, all of those are going to be part of any solution that you choose. It's not either or, but by giving people tools to have that conversation, say some combination of these things together are going to be your solution going forward, that accelerates the conversation, lets you get into the substance of it instead of just the, I think there's a lot of starting from square one and starting from scratch in these conversations that we can fast forward past.
So one of the things that I've been taken with is the vision that the group came to. Let me just say first that we only have one educator on the task force, and that's Wanda. She's been a great advocate. We have a librarian. We have other practitioners, but this really came with the attitude of let's talk about learning, not necessarily the educational system. And even within the Aspen Institute, we have an education program. We have a communications and society program, which is where this actual activity resides. Not that it has to be that siloed, but the point is that the vision was one of learning, not of the education. Maybe, John, maybe you could just talk a little bit more about how the group came to a vision of that led to some of the conclusions.
Yeah, I think it started a little bit with John Seeley Brown sort of challenging us about sort of a very student learner-centric model of education. If you think about it, we actually almost have the opposite. We have sort of an institutional-based model that's sort of asking students to conform to the institution instead of the institutions conforming to the unique student needs. And the more I think, again, these diverse sort of perspectives from the panel with Wanda and also engaging a lot of experts and practitioners from the field, there was this notion of really, we have talked about in education technology sort of learning anywhere, anytime for years, but it's always been sort of more of a promise that's been lagging reality. And for the first time, we're sort of catching up to that, where it really is true. When the Los Angeles Public Library System, you can walk into any one of their branches and take one of 800 courses. Is it a library or is it a school? The same thing in terms of what's happening with new online courses, with new online materials. OER are coming from publishers or from education startups that are just popping up literally in garages around the country. And it's creating this ecosystem of new education opportunities. The key for us is to change the system to take advantage of that, make sure students have access to that. But also, wrestle with a lot of other things too. If we have learning anytime, anywhere, how do you make sure students get credit for that learning anytime, anywhere? That changes the way we think about credits. It encourages things like badges. It encourages things like competency-based learning. It encourages a lot of stuff that I know a lot of folks in this room, are really advocating and are championing. What we hope is that this vision and this report and the task force will give you some wind behind your sails to help sort of catapult you and propel you forward and help sort of till some of the new ground in front of you. With these laws that Anil were talking about, that's something we track. It's literally hundreds of laws each year that policymakers are wrestling with. And it's helping, you are the converted. So how do we reach some of the other folks that are still thinking, yeah, is this a fad? Or it's just kids doing bad things with computers, not seeing the opportunity. So it's really trying to help cast the opportunity.
Yeah, I'd amplify one of those points. There was no assumption that the people in the room are experts in particular on any of these things more than all of you are, everybody else having these conversations. It was more about, can we make a framework where people who are experts and have tremendous depth in one area can give a context of where this fits in and where the project you're working on sort of meets this entire framework for what's going on. Because I think there's a tendency to want to say, well, we have a definitive answer, and I think instead we came up with a lot of useful questions that advance the conversation in some cases.
And speaking of that, we are going to have, I think, a substantial question and answer or interactive time in this session, because we haven't finished the report. It's pretty far along, but we still want, we would love to have had all of you in that room. You just can't work with hundreds of people, but we would love to get your reaction. So it doesn't even have to be a question; it can be a comment, as long as it's not very long. In terms of what is it that you see as the key insight that you think we should be taking into account as we tend to finalize. I mean, we have this vision, we have this approach, but let me, Rosario, you've done so much great work in bringing people in to the system, into the like Voto Latino and all, and I just thought maybe you might want to expand on your views towards access by all to the kinds of technologies and learning opportunities that are out there.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's one of the things I'm really excited about working with this is exactly the information that we're going to be bracing educators and parents and students alike with. I think that there has been a lot of frustration, I think, for a lot of young people. They're getting cell phones, they're starting to get access, but they're not having real kind of intergenerational conversations like they could be having. And I think this gives a good opportunity for parents who are going, I don't understand this, I'm not really understanding, I think that I know what's going on with my kid, I think I know what's happening. Well, 71% of kids say that they have been contacted by a stranger online. 30 to 40% are saying they consider meeting that person, and 14% said that they have. I have a lot of feeling that parents do not know that. And so it's really important, I think, to start making this landscape, this new dimension that younger people feel completely connected to, with no understanding of privacy, and why this conversation is so important. California just passed a law called the Erase Law, which is awesome in California for if you're under 18 to be able to delete those posts or pictures or things that might be compromising to you or your future. And that might not seem like something for kids today that they have to worry about, but when your person who's going to be looking out for you to kind of be hiring you for a job can Google you now, which is a really different thing, it really suddenly makes your online profile something really important. So I'm really excited about the fact that we're not only just talking about how libraries are important and museums are important, because as you know, when the economy gets hit hard, the first thing that suffers are those public spaces. And that's a huge resource for a lot of the kids that I work with, from the Lower East Side Girls Club to all the different organizations I work with, from V-Day to Voto Latino. We're talking to people who have access on their cell phone, but they're not able to do all of their work on there. And we're learning more and more and more that yes, and when you sit in class and you have tutors and you have after-school programs, that's really helpful. But a lot of these kids are learning that at 2 o'clock in the morning they want to look at that lecture and listen to it again, and that's when they really get it, and their grades are improving. So how do we make sure that we're giving them those outside museums and libraries and having access to those spaces, but also making sure that where they are already online and where they're looking for their information, they can continue to get credit for. And I think that's why this conversation is so important. It's just bringing all of the different people who are part of it and putting them all together and going, you're not alone. I think one of the things that was really fascinating in some of the conversations I've sat in on are people talking about, well, let's create a database for teachers, and we highlight the best teachers, and we just aggregate them, and it's like, well, we already have a system that benefits teachers. You know, we already have tenureship, and we already have that. What happens if you're a student and you're in a school, and the teacher that's being remarked upon as being a great teacher that's a part of this great online resource, but you're not in that class? What does that do to you? Like, there's a whole culture that the emotional aspect, the intelligent learning, which I also think is really amazing, because we aren't just talking about digital learning and literacy or any of that. We're also talking about the personal experience that you have, that is this dimension that you exist on that feels very alive to you. How do you make sure that that is something that's sacred and that we're putting into consideration? I think that's one of the most exciting parts about it, is that we're really humanizing the landscape, the entire landscape for learning, and making sure intergenerationally we're making it accessible for everyone to have this information to be braced with so they can make better choices education-wise.
One of the things, I'll answer my earlier question, which was what was surprising. One of the things that was surprising to me was how the importance of literacy as an internal way of dealing with some of the safety questions. And maybe either one of you two might want to address that, which is, how does getting digital media, social emotional type literacies help in fostering a safe environment?
I think so. Almost every recommendation we have is grounded in the social and emotional literacy of particularly young people. And it's about knowing that context, about trusting them to sort of be able to also articulate to parents and educators what they need. One of the striking things I think about is we do say so many kids are, you know, having conversations and contacts that their parents might not know about online. The flip side to that is when we also want them to go to a program at a library where they're learning, you know, it's not at all inconceivable they're going to be sitting next to an adult who needs remediation on that same topic. If we're talking about lifelong learning and we're saying, you know, that's that adult that's saying, gosh, I just never got that grade at algebra, let me go and learn this at the library. It might be next to a young person. So there are contexts where we want to encourage them to be, frankly, sitting next to an adult stranger learning something. And in both those contexts, the difference between what's good and what's bad is all about the social literacy, the entire life of this child, the entire context in which they work and learn and live. And I think being able to keep coming back to that as the grounding, the prerequisite for success is so important. And one of the things that jumped out of that was even how we talk about access. Obviously, with mobile devices, in many cases, we're seeing an improvement on the divide versus what we saw with desktop computers. But then we looked, because we had such a sort of cross-disciplinary view, at what access means, and we find there are young people who have what we consider broadband access at school, but YouTube is filtered out. And then at home, they have narrowband access that's very slow, so YouTube is technically accessible but not practical. And what we end up with is you know, millions of kids that can't use a tool like whether it's Khan Academy or any of the other ones we talk about. And the only way we know this is if we keep that learner-centered, keep focusing on the student who's learning, and then imagine the world around them. And that goes all the way to impacting policy. How does someone at the FCC define access? It goes to how we define curriculum, where we're saying it actually has tremendous impact on what you teach a child, which platforms, which hardware platforms, which software platforms or technology you choose. And those are things that we think about in the abstract in these budget meetings that are completely divorced from the context of, well, this child lives between two different homes with two different parents, and they have completely different hardware and software and connectivity at those two different homes. And so this set of lesson plans won't apply because, you know, one parent uses Android and the other uses an iPhone. Those things we need to have a way to think about. And you know, again, people in this room might be familiar with some of those ideas, but by hopefully going through this process, we give you a tool to take to educators, to take to decision makers, and be able to say, have we checked the box on these things?
So learner-centered, John, what does that mean to you when you say a learner-centered policy and learner-centered approach? Is that?
You know, I think it's possible now because of technology, and it's not just technology. We struggle with words sometimes because it's not just technology, but it's these experiences that the technology connects you to. You know, for the first time, you know, we can create an education system that can really customize and personalize learning for students based on not just getting them college and career ready and ready to participate in a thriving democracy, but do that in a way that touches on their passions and on their interests. It also stitches together all their education experiences. Not, we still have these sort of like silos. We talk about like you have school and then out of school, right? There's summer school. We talk about these in categories that often are just sort of siloed. We don't sort of stitch them all together. And now for the first time, we can sort of harmonize that. We can bring that together. Students can have their own sort of record backpacks that go with them with credits and with badges that help demonstrate what they've learned. Gives some visibility, particularly with sort of privacy controls, so that the after-school tutor can see what the teachers have shared inside of a classroom. The same thing if a student takes a MOOC at a library, that credit is transferred in. So it's all these things in terms of bringing back an experience that touches on that student's individual passions, their interests, and helps build a scaffold and a path forward with them. I think we're going to need a lot more sort of guidance systems. What's the Siri GPS for a student to try to figure out, like, I'm interested in math or science or the arts, what are the courses and what's the right combination of in-school and out-of-school experiences for me to help get there?
And again, that's obviously not something that's not been done for a long time. You've seen certain types of institutions and colleges that have been doing that, where you can share credits or you can use life experience to use and apply as a credit.
Yep.
But it's not been something that's been across the board. And imagine if that being something that is accessible to everyone. And that makes education then and the internet something that's incredibly a huge equalizer for everyone across the board, whether you can go to these grand sort of institutions that have this already sort of implemented. Now every student could potentially have access to that type of structure that would give them the benefit of when they are taking that time. Maybe they don't get along with their teacher. Maybe they're having a hard time in the particular school that they're going to. They didn't win the lottery to go to that charter school. They don't have the finances or didn't get the financial benefit of being able to go to some other school, but they can go online. They can spend those extra hours using the Wi-Fi at their local library. They can get that access to that information, and they can reach for the stars.
We have a microphone in the center of the room. We'd love to get your comments and questions. Before we do, Anil, we talked a little bit in terms of the barriers about the infrastructure. Mm-hmm. What has to happen to, I don't mean, rewiring or unwiring the country, but how do you see this, the infrastructure issue, leading towards greater interoperability across platforms?
There are so many aspects to it. Some of it obviously is good policy. My personal belief, separate from the findings in the report, it really is going to be about investment in infrastructure being as important as it was with physical infrastructure when we built the highway system and other things like that. I think the thing that can translate directly into something actionable out of this report is saying what that means at a community level. I mean, I think we have in many ways forgotten that what we do in our neighborhoods, what we do in our communities impacts nationwide, impacts worldwide, and is very profound. And I think my greatest hope is that we are able to give enough tools for someone to say in their own community, the people they know, let's define access this way. It means being able to get to creation of media, not just consumption. It means being able to get to high-speed access regardless of where that kid is based and what they're learning. Thinking about something like the 30% of American homes where a substantial percentage of their connectivity comes through the local library, being able to identify that as something to be addressed and be improved, where right now the people who know that don't tend to have a way to articulate it in their broader community. And it's the sort of thing, if you say, well, library connectivity impacts education, but you go to a school board meeting and say, well, that's not us. That's not our budget. Those aren't our dollars. We can't control that. And hopefully we can give people the tools to connect those together.
And just, I just want to, because I see some FCC staff out in the audience, but just give them credit because they're going through a process right now to modernize and upgrade, the primary federal investment in broadband for schools and for libraries, and they're doing this by asking a lot of questions. And so it is the easiest way for you all to participate is to help sort of inform these super smart telecom lawyer folks, kind of like what's going on inside of your schools, your communities, with your kids, and what kind of broadband do you need, what kind of technology infrastructure do you need. that's going to be a big part of the solution because that's going to help provide some of the fast broadband pipes to schools and to libraries. We still have the challenge of, especially what Anil was talking about, which is how do we make sure the connectivity is mobile and available at home and in other parts of the community too. Yeah, and that's going to be a sort of a separate set of challenges, but we're seeing people solve that in really creative ways from, the Comcast's Internet Essentials, which just announced that they're going to expand that and continue that program. We've been talking, I ran into Dr. Mark Edwards from Mooresville here at the South by Southwest, and he said that they just did a deal to help provide low-cost broadband for some of their low-income kids. So, this can be a solution that schools can help solve and help make sure that the infrastructure is there. But definitely want to credit the FCC for their work.
Great, and we should acknowledge, I know Jessica Rosenworcel just spoke on the work that the FCC is doing on the E-rate. It is a very important proceeding. I'm hoping that people here are involved in that. And it's, the federal government doing what it can in terms of connectivity. But the vision that we have, I think, in this task force has been learner up, community up. It starts with the learner and goes out. It starts with the community and goes up. And I think that's an important way of describing how this group has taken this approach. Let's start with the first question. Or comment.
Hi, thank you for being here. I'm James Britton with Purdue University. I'm digital communications for student affairs there. There's a million things I want to say, but I'll keep it brief to 2 comments, questions. First of all, at Purdue, we're in the development stages of a digital badge system using our own homegrown openpassport.org. Anybody can sign up, actually, not just Purdue students, so check that out. And specifically, my role is communicating to the co-curricular experience at Purdue and gamifying using digital badges to help college students sort of legitimize their outside the classroom experiences. And that will feed into a co-curricular transcript that they can carry with them when they go to apply for a job, for example. And hopefully you can comment on some of those issues. My second comment is more serious. It's very concerning, that Comcast is affiliated with you, and it's also concerning, hopefully the FCC is listening, that Comcast Time Warner cable merger is happening. There's pay-to-play issues. There's a million issues surrounding that. Frankly, $45 a month for broadband that's paltry speeds is reprehensible in this country. There's this artificial sense that bits cost money to send, even though the infrastructure is already in place. And I think that the regulatory agencies in this country really need to get a grip with things and keep a free and open internet and certainly a low-cost internet for people in low-income situations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me address the last point, which is we're not getting into the FCC data, issues. Obviously, that's an important proceeding before the FCC, but we're not going into the either the net neutrality or the concentration issue. We did try to get a number of companies that at times are competing, contrasting. They have, believe me, there are conflicting intentions among all those companies. But we thought to do this without recognizing that there are companies out there, one, providing however you want to describe the service, and 2, entities that people are connected to, just like there are libraries and schools, is an important element that we wanted to bring in. As to the first point on credentials, it sounds fabulous. John or anybody, do you want to respond to that?
Maybe just echoing something Charlie said. So, all these issues we're talking about, when I throw out sort of competency-based learning, that, for many people in this audience isn't controversial, but for other folks that is controversial. So it's not that some of these recommendations aren't going to have, foster sort of a debate and a healthy discussion. I think it's the same way in terms of we can agree on sort of the need for broadband. How do we get that broadband? Obviously, there's a whole lot of disagreements and debate about that. That's healthy. We want to sort of foster that. but will help sort of tackle some of that. Same thing on the privacy issues. So I mean, a lot of this is to try to help further extend the debate. I don't think we're going to help solve it, but definitely appreciate the comments. Same thing with badges. I commend you on the fact that you're sort of exploring what's the way to use badges. This was something we were exploring a little bit, in particular because MacArthur has been funding a lot of the open badge work for K-12 education. They just did a big pilot in Chicago, but it was fascinating. Like the problem wasn't technological. They had sort of an open badge network. It was a lot of the negotiations that had to happen with dozens of lawyers over 3 months in order to sort of help recognize this and sort of free that up. And so that's something we're trying to capture here as well. But just commend you on exploring that in the higher education setting.
It sounds fabulous what Purdue is doing. One other thing I should say about the Comcast representative is it's a representative of NBC Universal, which is doing this NBC education project, so they do belong to Comcast, but that's not the person we actually brought in.
I would jump on 2 things really quickly there. One is, I've been an unapologetic Comcast critic and was happy to have somebody from that company in the room. You have to have both. And I think something like their Lifeline access is interesting, separate from whatever critiques we have of it, because it was policy oriented towards getting broadband to more people. Now, how far that succeeded and whether it succeeded and what the intentions of it were is a separate conversation. But without having them in the room, you don't have the effort at all. And I think this ties into the point I have actually about badges. My family's in this country because my dad came to the US to get his PhD at Purdue. That credential mattered enough to our country to say, even though at that time they didn't allow immigrants from India basically to come here, they're going to make an exception because education matters and this particular kind of credential matters. And then I became the first in my family to not go to college. Like my grandmother in India in British rule went to college and I didn't. And my parents' concern about this was, well, how are they going to know what you know? They said, you know computers, and obviously we think that's important and going to be valuable, but how are they going to know what you know? And at that point, this is 20 years ago, we couldn't conceive of a digital badge as a way to say, well, I have these competencies and these things. And so the impact is not merely career. Like we obviously, with a room full of so many people in education, we can't just measure education outputs based on salary of a graduate, right? There are many, many more considerations here. One of them is in a family representing achievement. One of them is in a community representing, in my case, living up to what it means to be the child of very well-educated people and saying, I too am well-educated, just not in this way. And so I think the power of badges, and one of the things we want to amplify, is it can be an extension of families that and contexts that care very, very deeply about education and care about that more than or separate from their attachment to an institution and its ways of credentialing. And so I think that's something that we tried to give a really good voice to that has not been articulated in a way that isn't oppositional. It's and, not or.
Okay, we'll go faster on the questions after
Sorry.
this. Next.
Hi, I'm Jeff Wayman. I'm an education consultant here in town. I'm a former education professor, but most importantly, I'm a daddy. And my 8-year-old son, we have talked to him about privacy and internet safety and things like that. Developmentally, though, he doesn't grasp these concepts in the same way that my 10-year-old daughter does, who certainly doesn't grasp them in the same way that a 17-year-old would. And so I'm wondering if your group has any plans or has addressed the developmental differences that happen for kids and how those relate to their privacy and safety.
Anybody want to?
I think the short version of it is being learner-centered means we're not tying it to age, we are tying it to capabilities. I don't know if there's more.
But I think there's some really amazing resources and things that do exist out there. My friend Jim Steyer wrote a book called Talking Back to Facebook that actually goes age by age for parents to really talk to them about how do you communicate literacy, digital literacy, what do you say to them, how much access do you give them to being online, where do you make sure that they have the computer in so it's always in a visible area for everyone. And I think that's really important that there are like common sense media. If you go to commonsense.org, it's a specific space that's created for parents to understanding where their kids are and what their age is and what's appropriate for them and how you have that conversation with them.
The draft has a recognition of the different capabilities, different age groups and all. we don't have the, necessarily the answers, but I think those were good answers.
Yeah, those are good answers. I'm glad you're addressing it because I haven't heard a word about it to this point here at the conference, so I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Good. Thank you.
it's very important.
Next.
Hi, my name is Kelly Amos. I'm a producer and director of a short film series called Teach. And all the films look at inequality in the education system and why we still have such inequality. One of the next films I'm working on is exactly on this issue of whether technology in education will help eliminate or exacerbate the inequality we already have to learning opportunities. And having interviewed a lot of students, you see that they could, if they have access, they're going to go way far beyond what their school expects them to learn, and even what their teachers may know in the classroom or be willing to share with them. So I've been looking at Khan Academy and other things that are online, and I met someone not too long ago who has made millions of fortune in education technology, sort of in other ways, and said, in his opinion, Khan Academy should be monetized, that you should pay to use that. And I said, well, how would all the kids who already are getting, the kids who need it the most and don't have access, how would they possibly get to use it then? Well, foundations will step in. That's what philanthropy does. And to me, that's like, well, if that's the case, that's exactly how our education system now is basically set up. If you have resources, you have access to a good education. If you don't, hopefully you get the scholarships. Hopefully some foundations, somehow you're gonna find them and they're gonna find you. So I guess my question is more if the task force has also looked at that, the content, and keeping content free, so that it's not dependent on maybe a kid can find a way, get a scholarship to pay for something.
Mm-hmm.
John?
I know that's a lot of where our focus was going on, but I also, just to throw back to the other question, I know that when we were talking about the emotional sort of aspect, that's a lot of when we're putting learners at the center of learning. The actual student. So that is a big part of addressing the age, because of understanding that kids who are gravitating more towards gaming or whatever, understanding that they have more depression, or knowing how to talk to these kids, for the teachers to be able to understand cyberbullying and all of those different things and aspects that can be impediments towards learning, and making sure that conversation goes across. So that's the sort of emotional aspect. But I know for a lot of it, what we've been focusing on education-wise and through the Aspen Task Force is making sure that we're talking about things that are accessible for everyone. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, but that's specifically the forums that we're looking at.
Yeah, I think I think in the end it's always going to be a mix of, there's going to be some things you pay for and some things that are free. I mean, even Khan is experimenting with sort of like a teacher dashboard that may be free in some cases and they may charge in other cases, but the videos themselves will still be free, and they are available to sort of remix and update. We're seeing this debate play out in MOOC. edX is a nonprofit and Coursera is a for-profit, and they're both trying to figure out sort of what's the right mix of free courses and what do you pay for and what do you not pay for. But I think the key that we're trying to address there is not just that balance of open and closed. Charlie really sort of teed it up for us as a task force very early on about, on all these debates, it's a tension, right? It's not an either or, but sort of where do you fall in these tensions between completely open and completely closed. And that's individual conversations, it's community conversations, it's school conversations that kind of determine where you are on those spectrums. But it's a huge issue. But we're also just, I think, as important in that is what happens if a student takes all the free Khan Academy calculus courses. What happens if they enroll in a computer science course that's a MOOC taught by Stanford? Right now, we don't have a system that would necessarily recognize that learning. What we have is a system that tells that student, that's great, but you have to take our computer science course. And oh, by the way, even if you could accelerate your learning and do that in 9 weeks, we're going to have to make you wait for the next 6 months in class before you could take the end of course exam to sort of demonstrate that competency. So that's part of what I think is the other balance on the other side of this as well, is making sure that if students have access to some of these learning opportunities, and it may be Khan, it may be a MOOC, maybe something at a museum or a science center or an after-school performance, that they are able to sort of get credit, and that credit can transfer and be recognized.
Well, we need to move on, but the other area that I'm quite interested in is the bring your own device element, and whether that's a method towards inequality. I mean, obviously it gets the students where they are on instruments they are, but some kids are going to have iPads, some kids are going to have barely smartphones, And I wonder if you're getting into that in your film.
Actually, just from the many kids who I have de facto adopted, I can tell you they will find a way to get a phone and an iPad. I mean, that I would say is a smaller percentage of people who actually are not going to have access to a phone at least, or
Yeah,
you can
sure.
go to the library. I think to me, it's not so much the device as what they're able to find
Yeah.
there for free once
Sure.
they
Yeah,
have it.
I will say education inequality factored into every single recommendation we made. It was part of the conversation continuing through the whole thing. And one of the things that was really heartening to me was whether people came from industry, from academia, or wherever else, the baseline of that access for all means access for all was just assumed as true. There was no real tension around that. Now, how we get there, obviously, I think to John's point, there's a lot of approaches, but there are at least some shared values that I had thought that would be more contentious that we arrived at, and so that was really reassuring.
Okay, next.
How are y'all doing? My name is Russell Armstrong. I actually manage ed and ed tech policy in Louisiana. I was wondering if the task force thought of, speaking of access for all, things like E-rate and that, which actually force, they manage all of these funding through schools. What about, did you all consider actually unbundling that and actually figuring out ways for money and funds to draw down directly to students to get at the last question, such as so they have access to devices, technology, and even with the first question about utilizing those funds to pay for even their own internet access, so it doesn't have to go through a product that's bought at the school, but really directly to students, since so much learning happens outside of school.
No.
Yeah, I mean, there's a person, 3 people over to your left. That's a good question for the FCC. But it's, but I think in part because we didn't go down into, what should change in terms of E-rate specific policy or Title I policy at the Department of Ed or USDA rural agriculture telecommunication, grants for distance learning. We didn't go into specific programmatic reforms. The good news, though, is what all this dovetails on is actually a programmatic modernization right now of the fundamental way that sort of E-rate is structured. And that's why these comment periods are going to be so important. So providing the FCC ideas and input in that, I know the FCC has struggled with this because there's just some realities that they face in terms of what's the best way to allocate sort of a limited number of dollars to students and to schools that need it the most for the services that are going to have the highest bang for the buck. We still have E-rate subsidizing pagers when we live in a broadband world. And so I think they're wrestling very much with, what should be eligible and what should not be eligible, what should be covered in terms of student mobility with internet access and what should be funded just at the school or the library. So that's a very real debate. It's not that we sort of punted on that, we just didn't have enough time to sort of get into program by programmatic sort of reforms there.
But what you will find in the conversation around the report is tools for having the conversation at the school level, at the school district level, of whether it's for access, for devices, for curriculum. Are purchases happening at a higher level, at a granular level, at the school district, at the individual student level, and just the tools to have that conversation. Because in many cases, this was a decision or a process around procurement that has been around for 50 years that hasn't been reconsidered. And so just even giving you the ability to have that conversation where you can be fluent and other people can be up to speed of, oh, this is the issue you're talking about, of who makes the decision for what tablets we buy or whatever the other choices are, you at least can have that conversation. I think it's a lot of what we thought about is not that we know the right answer, but we can help you reach the answer on your own.
Okay, it looks like we have 3 more people, so why don't each of you give your question, comment, and then we'll have to wrap up. Either we'll answer or we won't, but at least we'll get, well, I mean, at least we'll get your comments in and not leave somebody left at the microphone.
Yeah. My name's Mike Olson with Talent Unbound in Houston, Texas. And my question is, what advice would you give aspiring teacher entrepreneurs who are standing in the crucible every day, looking at their students, and they're watching this avalanche of technology and tools that have the power to fundamentally just change and reimagine what the school day looks like, but they don't want to, it hurts their soul to watch this, to wait for the system to change, and they want to step out and do something really entrepreneurial and try to do this. What advice would you give them or the Aspen Task Force to kind of find these teachers that, and John, I love your words, a way to stitch together all of these tools in a way that is just fundamentally different, because they're with the kids day in and day out. And I think they have such wonderful insights on how to do this, but yet regulations, policies, everything that you guys are talking about are barriers that they're just banging their heads against the wall. So just what advice would you give teachers that are right there and want to change the world?
Okay, got it. Next comment.
Okay, so really thank you for presenting today. As we're moving into this new realm of e-learning and all the opportunities that it brings, the accessibility is very important, the trustability and the privacy protections. And with that comes a lot of need for identity authentication, some proctoring, and not only of the students, but also of the teachers and the tutors that are connecting to those students. How do we bring this all into policy? And also, how do we look beyond just the United States, but worldwide? Because e-learning is really obeying no borders. It goes everywhere. How do we standardize that? How do we bring it forward?
Great. Can you identify yourself?
No.
Identity.
I'm sorry. Bart Bombay with Gemalto.
Okay, thank you. Last question, point.
Hi, my name is Eduardo Caballero, and I'm with Adventure More. We're in an organization that works in out-of-school time learning. And I'm curious to hear your opinions on how you see the messaging to families and kids about college now with all these new forms of learning out there. The very traditional messages, go to college. And how do you see that message evolving now that there's all these kind of different forms of learning? Up to your opinions.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is we have 3 minutes. So each of you can take a minute in answering any of those questions or any conclusory comments you want to make. Why don't we start with Anil?
I think common thread through all of those is how do we solve this class of problems? I have an idea. I'm an entrepreneurial teacher. In all cases, one thing that consistently helps for people who want to be advocates for learners, especially for kids who are learning, is to document what you find. Just the simple act of recording, I'm a teacher, I wanted to do this, these were the obstacles that I got past, these are the ones I didn't know how to get past, but here's my experience. That is incredibly powerful. It sounds so basic, but being able to have that, to look at it, to share it, to refer to it, for us to amplify it if we can, or to connect with others who had the same issue, that is how these things transform. I think I came in thinking policy is this world that I don't understand or know and I don't have any background in. And it turns out there are these small things that we can do that have transformative impact and can make a huge impact when we work together on them. I think the common line on all of these is hopefully you take the tools that we've been working on, as well as what everybody in this room and the rest of the community cares about this is doing, and just build on that and share what you find along the way. This is the lesson I think that students and kids will learn by example from the most. So if we're reading, we're learning, we're documenting what we learn, and we're sharing it with the world, that's what we want them to be doing too.
So I think great questions, by the way, and I think part of this, part of creating that space for innovation, whether you're a superintendent leading a system, a head librarian, or a teacher that just wants to try something new, part of the intention of this task force, this report, and many of our sort of daily sort of work in our day jobs is about trying to create that space for innovation. And that deals with policy in sometimes not sexy ways, when it's procurement regulations and things like seat time law and like, what is this legislation you speak of? Like there's just, it's very sort of cumbersome, especially when, Anil mentioned, there's like hundreds of bills being tracked, and we're trying to help simplify that. But hopefully this report is casting a vision, but then also trying to map out some of the territory to create some of that space so the teachers and school leaders and librarians and community leaders can really sort of experiment. So that's a huge part of this, and you're going to hear a lot of sort of hopefully aspiration of casting this as a really big opportunity for people to take advantage of. And also, conversely to that too, try to also help protect the teacher role in this. I mean, there's a real danger, and Wanda sort of really helped make sure she, again, our heart and conscious in this, that it's not technology replacing the teacher, but this creates new roles for teachers. It creates new opportunities for teachers. It makes the teacher more important in many instances because they're providing more one-on-one instruction. But it's important for that vision to get out there just as much as it is for this interconnected sort of learning system as well.
You have 2 billion people on the planet who are using the internet. So, and we already are passing over badges or diplomas going across countries and divides that we're recognizing. So we're hoping that that continues, obviously, with badges and continues on with that. But already you're seeing, especially in the internet, around privacy, especially around protecting children, agencies all around the world who are starting to refine the process of what they're doing on local and state and country levels. And now they're having to do it worldwide because slavery and predators exist all across lines. The divided world is no longer. We are a global world. And so we're seeing in so many different agencies, and I think that innovation is going to definitely push into the education space, where we're going to just necessitate people having to communicate on that level. And so because of that already exists, we already have people who have been recording, who have been saying this practice has been working. I've been using music. I've been having kids learning code and making video games, and they're learning how that way. And I think that's the thing that's really amazing, is finding that teachers are already speaking to other teachers and going, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I'm teaching a 5th grade class the exact same subject. This is what worked, and they're starting to communicate. What just needs to be created is something, as a space that everyone trusts and recognizes, so that those practices that are already occurring between teachers can be supplemented and done on a much greater level, and everyone can appreciate and enjoy. And with that comes a lot of people who are doing quite a lot of things right now to be protecting kids' spaces. They're doing a lot of stuff about making sure that under 18, their geolocations can't be given, that any things that are being done in education will be only used for educational purposes, that information does not, that data that is being collected and being used does not come out of those spaces. So there's just know that there are a lot of people, including all the people that we're working with at Aspen Task Force, that are really trying to address all of these problems. And I hope that you will check in May when our discoveries can be presented, and you continue the debate and conversation with us.
Great. So we put up a couple of last learning points. But the point is, our report will come out in May. We hope you'll be involved. We want to thank EDU for letting us preview it. We want to thank the MacArthur Foundation for supporting and really starting this effort. We want to thank you for sticking around for an hour to listen to us. And the awesome panel that presented, thank you. We'll hope to see you in... And do we have the slide with the, yeah, so to get the report, if you sign up or go to our aspentaskforce.org website and sign in, we'll get you the report. Thank you very much.
Thank you.